Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the L Forum Leadership Series. Today, I have the privilege and honor of speaking to a person who straddles multiple worlds and wear multiple hats. He's a corporate leader, he's a social entrepreneur, he's a philanthropist, and sports enthusiast. So he wears multiple hats, and I'm very excited to talk to our guest for this show and give us his insights on leadership and entrepreneurship. Welcome, Firo.
Thank you, Ringo. My pleasure. Such a delight speaking to you over this conversation.
It's really a delight, and I am going to probably get a little, let's say, bamboozled as to which track I would like to take to you. Should I be talking to the corporate leader or the social entrepreneur? So we are going to take it as organically as possible.
Sure.
So without further ado, I would like you to share with us your background and tell us how your journey so far in the various tracks that you have so successfully managed.
Yeah, maybe let me start with what I do in my day job. I work for a very small company called SAP.
Just a $200 billion industry, right? It's called the
Yeah.
SAP Nation, right?
Yeah, but I jokingly say I've kind of become the furniture in the company because I've spent almost 22 years at
Wow, that's a
SAP.
lifetime.
Yeah, so almost half my life I've spent at SAP. So you kind of know what my age is.
You timestamped yourself.
Yeah. So I've spent a significant time at SAP, which is really what keeps me busy. And I head something called the SAP Academy for Engineering, whose mission is to build the next generation of engineers.
Excellent.
Which is a very broad mission, really to see can the engineers at SAP build the next breakthrough product, right? And take SAP to the next level. SAP as a company has been there for 50 years. In fact, we're just celebrating our 50th year. We started in 1972.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah. So speaking about entrepreneurship, forgive me if I'm digressing a little bit, but SAP as a company is a classic example of what great entrepreneurs can do. They can build organizations which are profitable and last a long period of time. I think that's a good example of what good entrepreneurs can do. But that's basically my SAP hat. What I'm really passionate about, Ringo, is really driving social change. And it really started with my own personal journey when my son was diagnosed with autism almost 10 years ago. And that really led me to understand the disability space, especially in India, and really drove me to drive change with disability inclusion in India. And that's how I started my nonprofit called India Inclusion Foundation, which is basically my social entrepreneurial hat that I wear. So those are the two major things, but I'm also passionate about writing. I write a regular column for Indian Express, I write for Forbes, and I also teach at Columbia University on a topic called personal leadership, which is all about how to lead yourself before you lead others. So that's basically a few things that I try to juggle in my life, Ringo.
Yeah, I wonder how you manage that on 24 hours. Yeah, I've seen emails from you at 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. So hats off to you. And I'm going to probably touch upon more of what you do across all of these. And I think,
Sure.
as you know, this forum that we have, Firo, is a confluence of entrepreneurs and leaders.
Sure.
I'm trying to, there is this group is basically we are trying to delve a little deeper into what does it take to be an entrepreneurial leader.
Sure.
It's an interesting facet, and I think the world has, like you rightly said, SAP in the 70s, possibly it was a very novel and not many really chose the entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah.
But I guess today, I'm sure you're encountering it in your teaching engagements as well. The entrepreneurial desire and passion is far higher in the younger generation.
Yeah.
And the hope is that this forum provides a platform to speak with leaders like yourselves and or get your insight on what has been your experience, what has been your learning, and see if we can help each other in this group.
Sure.
So that's
Sure.
broadly the objective of my group here.
Sure.
So, given that, I would love to hear from you, Firo. What are your perspectives of leadership? What do you see as leadership and your experiences around leadership broadly?
Yeah, leadership is such a broad topic that has been spoken about, since the advent of humankind. So this is very difficult to have one specific answer to who is a leader or what is leadership. But the one thing that I often say, which I think, at least from my point of view, is probably the closest definition of what a good leader is. A good leader has this burning desire to make the world a better place. Okay.
Awesome.
That's how I would kind of put it in a simple sentence. And I use the word burning desire because this is not yet another thing that you say, okay, let me try to do this. No, they have a burning desire to make the world a better place. Day in and day out, they are passionate about lifting others up. Yeah, that for me is a definition of a very good leader, which means they take these missions across a very long period of time. And often people use the word scale, right? In terms of what is the scale of impact and what is the measure of the impact of a leader. And the most interesting aspect, which people often don't put too much emphasis on, is that the measure of scale is time. Okay, and let me try to explain that. So I say a good entrepreneur can be measured by how long has he been on that journey.
Okay.
It's not I've made $10 million. It's not I've impacted 20,000 people. It's not the fact that I've hired 100,000 employees. Those are just good indicators, but the real good indicator is how long have you been in that entrepreneurial journey. SAP, good company, 50 years. Okay. Now you can always argue, Google is a great entrepreneurial venture. Yeah, but they've been there for maybe 20 years, right? So let's see if they can last 50 years or if they can last 100 years. So I think a good measure of scale is time, is how long are you relevant?
So basically, how long is that competitive advantage a competitive advantage, right?
Absolutely.
What strategy is all
and which
about.
often always means that you have to keep reinventing yourself over and over again. So the ability to remain relevant for a long period of time is a good indication of being a good entrepreneur or a good leader.
Excellent insight. That's excellent, Takiro. And what other traits do you think are critical to be a sustainable leader?
Good leaders, good entrepreneurs, and this is common to both leadership and entrepreneurship, is that they fall in love with the problem. Okay. And I've seen a lot of people do the exact opposite and don't realize it. They fall in love with the solution. Right. So good entrepreneurs fall in love with the problem, and then the solution is an outcome of their passion to solve that problem. Just to give you an example, when I looked at this disability space, the first thing I realized is that I've been working on that space for 10 years. It's an incredibly complex problem. If my mission is to make India a much more inclusive country, it's a complex problem. It's a multidimensional problem. It's a problem which will never get solved in my lifetime. It'll probably take 3 generations to really make, say, India a much more inclusive country. But day in and day out, I'm thinking about the problem. I'm not thinking about just the solution. Once you think deeply about the problem, the solutions will happen. Right? So the most important element is to fall in love with the problem.
That's very, very powerful, because problems are solutions, as you say, keep evolving and changing with time.
Yeah.
But problems, I guess, are more long term and more systemic, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's an excellent insight. So, what prompted you to be a social entrepreneur? You just mentioned that personal experience kind of motivated you, but what was you realize that it was going to take up a lot of sacrifice from you, a lot of a lot of how where did you get the vision to do this? How did you get that?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, it's a very slow process. It's not that when I got into it, I really understood. I had this blueprint as to how to do it. I had no clue. I kind of learned it as I evolved myself. And going back to falling in love with the problem, the more I understood the problem, the more clarity I got in terms of what needs to be done. In fact, my next book, which is called The Invisible Majority, is going to be released in the next couple of months. I mean, very grateful that His Holiness the Dalai Lama has actually written the foreword for the book.
Awesome.
And that's basically my 10 years in the disability inclusion space. What have I understood? Why is it so complex? How can it be solved? What's the blueprint to making a whole country truly inclusive? Now, this is a bold and audacious goal. I mean, you're talking about making inclusion for 1.3 billion people. So it's a complex problem. It is multidimensional. There are no simple solutions to it. So in some ways, I love to solve complex problems. So that kind of inspires me to do it. But I also want to do it for the right reasons, right? So I'm not trying to make money out of it. And maybe that's a fundamental difference that I've seen with entrepreneurs who work for profit versus entrepreneurs who work for impact. And I think both are absolutely essential and both do it for their own reasons. But maybe the one fundamental difference that I found in both of these, and I'm saying this because I kind of wear both the hats. I live my day job in a company which is trying to sell products and make money. I run my foundation with the objective of creating more impact. And so the first and the most fundamental difference that I find is that in the social spectrum, in my social enterprise, I am centralizing on purpose and decentralizing on power. Whereas on the business context, I'm actually centralizing on power, decentralizing on purpose. Okay, and there's a very fundamental difference because if you look at every organization, it's hierarchical, right? It's like a pyramid. The most powerful person sits on the top, right? And anybody who wants to grow in the organization is chasing power.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Right? In the social sector, you are chasing purpose, not power. So that's the fundamental difference.
So I'm going to ask probably, I don't know what kind of a question this might be, but without purpose, do you think any entrepreneurial setup will set itself up for success without a purpose or a goal?
Very good question, and very hard. And the reason I'm saying this is because entrepreneurial, you can be an entrepreneur with one person. That's also possible. I've seen great entrepreneurs who are doing the job alone. But most entrepreneurial venture needs a team, right? And how do you get a team? How do you get people to sign up? Is to show your vision, which is centered on purpose, right? That's the only reason people sign up for. So, so it's very hard to build something which is not centered on purpose. Very, very hard. But if you're truthful, most companies are centered on making money. I mean, that is their mission. And that's why I said you decentralize on purpose. Purpose is there. Every company has a purpose statement. But let's be honest, is that what you live day in and day out for? Probably not.
Very well said. And so my question is, for a company to be, or an entrepreneurial venture to be successful, do you feel a constant focus on purpose? I mean, you're right. As the organization gets larger, the purpose does gets little
diluted.
Diluted. And the vision alignment is probably not as much as when it was a smaller organization. I'm sure all of us have felt that journey. And I'm sure in your social entrepreneurial setups as well, you might feel it sometimes when the firm and your setup is larger. Are you able to talk to the last frontline person, right?
Yeah.
You're absolutely, and you've summed it up beautifully, and I'm going to use it somewhere.
Yeah.
So that's a nice line you use. My question is, so the entrepreneurial leader, do
Yeah.
you see your skills as a corporate leader fungible in the entrepreneurial setup, or are they siloed two skill sets that you require?
No, I think these are probably common skills that you need, whether you're running a social entrepreneur or a business entrepreneur. I think there are, the most important element I see is that you need as an entrepreneur is absolute clarity of vision. This is super important. Most people are not have that level of clarity, and this is, by the way, true for all leaders, right? Leaders have an incredible clarity of what they're trying to achieve. They're able to kind of remove all the noise out of the system and focus on the one thing that they're passionately wanting to solve. So I think clarity of thought is probably the single most important element, whether you're an entrepreneur or a leader. Because once you're clear on it, and by the way, it may be a complex problem, but you're able to distill it to extreme simplicity so that everybody understands it. For me, clarity of thought is probably the single most important element of a leader or also of an entrepreneur.
Excellent. So I'm going to then dive into my next question, which is, how do you communicate this clarity of thought or vision?
Yeah.
So I guess, as the organization gets bigger,
Yeah.
maybe it gets diluted because of the message that gets passed on to multiple levels.
Yeah.
So how do you keep it sustainable, and how have you been able to keep it sustainable in your India Inclusion Forum? How have you done that?
Yeah, I think repetition is the best way to do it, right? Repeat it often, tell it loud and clear. And there are studies to show that, if you want people to understand your strategy, tell it at least 7 times. And so there is nothing called over communication when it comes to your vision. Do it often. I do it so many times, even at the cost of sounding it extremely boring and repetitive. And that's one of the tasks of a leader, that you have to do the same things over and over again, but make it look like you're doing it for the first time. I've done keynotes, the same speeches for like 40 times, and even at the 40th time I have to go in and speak as if I'm doing it for the first time. I think that's something that you learn as a entrepreneur or a leader. But I think repetition is the most important element. But clarity comes by doing. Okay. And this is something that I keep talking about. Leadership is about doing it. Entrepreneurship is about doing it. The more you do, the more clarity, more clarity you get. So, there's not too much space for armchair activists or armchair leaders. It just doesn't help. You have to get down to the ground, do it yourself. Once you do it, you will realize the pitfalls and you would learn, and that will give you more and more clarity. And with more clarity, I think you're able to articulate it in a much better form as well. So I think there are no shortcuts, unfortunately, Ringo. This is a constant evolution, and you can only get better if you do it more often.
Excellent. What other traits do you think an entrepreneur should have to be?
Good question. I think probably the most important element is the ability to form a good team. I've often get a lot of startups coming and presenting their ideas, and the first thing you look, whether you're an investor or just trying to give some advice, is to see how good is the team. Right? It's not just the founders, but the first level of people who are part of that journey. I think a good team means that you are able to sell your vision in a way that you've got really good people to back you up. So a good team is very important. Second is, do you really have patience? Because this is a long, difficult journey. Entrepreneurship is not easy. You know it, right? Are you able to withstand the ups and downs and the highs and lows of that journey? So the ability to see long-term outcomes and not short-term wins is so fundamental to being a successful entrepreneur. And last but not the least, I'll always go back to, how passionate are you about solving the problem? Are you in
That
love
was
with
a
the problem?
beautiful thing. How important is the problem? Most people, I think, are looking to solve the symptoms and not the cause, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's the
yeah,
classic thing.
yeah,
So in your journey, which
yeah.
is, you've straddled national responsibilities, international responsibilities in a firm as large as SAP, and then you've taken on something which is so important and impactful in the social entrepreneurship space. What have been, can you kind of collate, these were my top challenges? Is there something that you could share with us? Challenges as a leader and as a social entrepreneur.
It's very interesting because when you're trying to work in the social enterprise space, I think it's way more complex. It's way more because there are so many different elements that come together that it's never a unidimensional problem. It's always a multidimensional problem. Just to give you an example of what I mean, when I was trying to solve disability, or not try to solve, but even try to understand disability, it took me a decade to understand that there are 7 different sometimes very opposing things that has to be worked on, right from awareness to education to employment to assisted living to so on. It's really, really complex. So it's a multi-dimensional problem that you're trying to solve. And there are multiple pulls and pushes that happen in every system. But the most important element, and this is something I found relevant not just in the social space, but also in large companies, is what I call as the public lies and private truths. Okay. And this is something that you have to be extremely aware of. There was a beautiful book written by the same title by a psychologist, and he said that our biggest challenge in the society is that people say something and mean something else, right?
Okay.
And I found this very, very interesting when it comes to diversity and inclusion, both within the corporate setup as well as outside. Everybody talks about diversity and inclusion. D&I is in the jargon for every large company.
Yes.
Okay, everybody has D&I as a topic. But the reality is the following, that people say something, but they actually don't mean it. They'll say, D&I is super important and I want everybody to follow it. But that's a good speech. They don't follow it through by practice. And that's a classic example of what I call as a public lies. Private truth is, what, don't care about it. It's not important.
Mm.
A classic example of that was what happened in the 2016 election, right? When Trump won, but all the pundits said, no, it would be Hillary Clinton who will win. What happened was people voted for Trump, but they said they voted for Hillary. So it's a classic example of what I call as a public lie. A private truth is something else. And you have to be very conscious of that when you're trying to drive large scale change, because people will tell you something will mean something else. And it happens in large companies too. It may seem like a very difficult to understand, but I found this to be so overwhelming in large companies.
And I think that happens, I guess, for various reasons. I'm sure they have their own reasons why they do that, but it definitely trips you up as an entrepreneur and as a leader,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You factor based on that. If I say something and I do something, you model based on what has been told to you.
Absolutely.
And then when the historic data shows up, it's something else. Then it's too late. You can't do anything now.
Yeah. And so it's very important to be brutally honest, because you may come to me with an idea, Ringo, and just because I don't want you to feel bad, I will say, great idea. Okay, great idea, go for it. What happens is, if 3 people tell you it's a great idea, but it's actually a lousy one, what will happen? You will just burn money out.
True.
Right?
And I think it's very topical. You share that idea because there are aspiring entrepreneurs in this group as well, that it's sometimes better to take that bitter pill and say, well, maybe it's not a good idea. Don't fall in love with your idea, and might have to let it go sometimes. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's why I always say, when as an entrepreneur, if you're going to show your idea or present your product to somebody, identify the right person, a person who is personally invested in your success, because he's the only one who's going to give you an honest feedback. Okay.
True. Very true.
Because if it's a lousy idea, you better get it from day one, because otherwise you're just going to crash after 2 years, and that would be very painful, right?
Very painful.
And that's so important in the entrepreneurial space.
Absolutely. And I think you kind of segued into my last question for our little session here is what is your advice and tips to leaders and entrepreneurs based on your learnings?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, if you have a compelling idea, don't worry so much about the profits. The profits will happen. Yeah, profits are an outcome of having a compelling idea, solving it with sincerity. I always believe that purity of intention is super, super critical. I'm a great believer in Gandhian philosophies, and so purity of intention is super important, right? Your intention has to be pure. You cannot think that, I'll kind of game the system and make some money. Those are all very short-term thinking. So have a compelling idea, number one. Build a world-class team, which is super important, and have patience. My thumb rule is do something for at least 10 years. If it's for less than 10 years, don't even get into that journey.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Now, I think that's great, great, crisp insight, Firo. Thank you so much. And needless to say, I would love you to participate more actively in this group, and
Thank you.
I would probably drag you for more conversations because you have such a wealth of experience, and we've not even touched upon your other passions, which is I know as your friend, I know there are other passions that you have, and you are very deep into all of that. So hopefully we'll bring you again some other
Sure.
time to share more insight. So we thank you very much for your time and wish you all success and all the best to you at with your I and at SAP.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Ringo. Thank you for having me in your talk. Thank you.
Thank you.